Hello, hello, my darlings. Hello, everyone, and good evening. This is a very impromptu live stream because I thought I was going to be on Joseph's channel, but it appears that I'm on my channel and Joseph is on my channel. And without further ado, I'd just like to say hello to Mr. Joseph from the Israeli Advocacy Group. Joseph, I do apologize. I am not on camera where you can see me, but I am on camera where the public can see me. So it's kind of a weird situation there because my OBS puts me on camera. I can only go on live one of them. And my cam will mix up. So how are you, sir?
As we say in the faith, Baruch Hashem, I'm good. Sorry about the confusion.
Yeah, it was.
I'm pretty sure you did invite me onto your channel, and that's maybe where the confusion.
That is fine. That is absolutely fine. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here. To be perfectly honest with you, as I said, because you're the one that does like much more sort of live shows and stuff like that. So I thought it was going to be on your show. But to be honest, I've been wanting this moment with you for ages, and so I don't really care. It doesn't matter where it is as long as it takes place, as long as the conversation takes place, which is what I was mostly interested in. Well, first of all, I hope you've had a good weekend, a good, I don't know, I guess you do Shabbat on Fridays and Saturdays?
Yeah, so exactly, from sundown on Friday night through to nightfall on Saturday.
Okay. So that's the general period, because it's not like the Christians or the Muslims where it's just on that day. Like the Muslims is basically Friday, that's it, and then Sunday for the Christians. You guys actually span across Friday through to Saturday.
So yeah, it's the same as an Islamic day, in the sense that Islamic day starts night till night, and on nightfall till nightfall, and with Shabbat it's the same. But with both of our offspring religions, they kind of shifted it forwards and backwards. So the Christians chose to go after us, and the Muslims decided to go before us. Neither were comfortable doing it on the original day. But, yeah.
It's all over the place. Nobody knows where all this stuff fits. We just know that it's at the weekend. It's at the end of the week, basically. It's the closest we're going to get to this. Sorry, I'm just readjusting some of my graphics here because, as I said, I haven't actually done a live show in such a long time. Everything's a mess. Everything's all over the shop. I'm having to readjust and sort of thing so that the viewers can actually see us both on the screen at the same. Because I was this tiny little character in the side, and you were the big star of the show, shall we say. Okay, fantastic. So let's crack on, because I'll be perfectly honest, I know you don't have a lot of time, and I want to try and squeeze a lot in this 1 hour, which I'm hoping to get with you. And let's start, I guess, from the latest events backwards. Now, first of all, for those who don't know, which I think is no one, but for those who don't know, what is your Israeli advocacy movement, and what is your sort of how long have you been going to the Speaker's Corner? Because that's where I know you from, so that's how long I've known you is from the Speaker's Corner thing. So how long have you been doing that, and what's the Israeli movement about?
So great. So first, the Israel Advocacy Movement is the UK's largest pro-Israel organization by social media following. And so we've got the largest online digital footprint, and our videos get watched by millions of people. And we're basically there we've got two functions, but they both tie into the same basic theme, which is ensuring that the Jewish people survive. And our greatest hope for survival is the state of Israel. Therefore, we advocate for the state of Israel outside of Israel, and we look to counter anti-Semitism, which the two are almost like in almost every case connected, and combat anti-Semitism in the UK. As for Speaker's Corner, I've been going there for over 10 years. It's considerably changed. When I used to go, all the Muslim brothers were my best friend. Whenever I went, I'd get a big hug. I'd be assalamu alaikum. The Jews and Muslims were the same. We believe in the same God. We believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it was very, very nice. And then a terrible thing happened. People started bringing video cameras, and the ego took over, and all of my friends suddenly turned into my enemies. And it was a very, very bizarre change of events.
So you are definitely in the camp of video cameras change people's behavior and persona, because when what they do behind closed doors and what they do in front of the public, if you will, video cameras really represent the public, the greater public, I would say. So how they are in their public persona and their private persona is two very different things.
And I'd also say it introduces the ego. Let's say we have a difference of theological or political, and there's just a difference between what we're both representing, the positions we hold. If there's no camera involved, people are much more willing to concede and listen to a position that they maybe feel threatened by, or it just contradicts their own beliefs. And I think the minute you put a camera in front of someone's face, their ego takes over, and I'd include myself in that. And you're much less willing to compromise, and you're much more inclined to try and save face or win your opponent rather than listen to what they're saying and reflect on a narrative you maybe haven't heard.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Not only in the camera sense, but actually, I also, I mean, a friend of mine, we've been debating like these subjects for a very long time, since the early 2000s, like 2001 for me. And what we found is, as far as the formal debate format is concerned, my friend, he's completely given up on formal debates because he finds them, he says they are absolutely useless. People are so entrenched in trying to win rather than trying to have a conversation that it's no longer really an exchange of ideas or information. It's just, I have to find a way to win over your argument, and they will use underhanded debate tactics and straw manning and all the other sort of tactics that come into it, red herrings and straw mans, and they throw this and they repeat or loop themselves, and it's all about, I have to win. I don't have to just, I'm not here just to exchange information with someone and then find a new perspective upon my ideas. No, I have to beat this person. And this is so incredibly obvious at Speaker's Corner. People are like, oh, he gave him an elbow from the top and he crushed him. And like, dude, this is not WWE. What are you doing? You're supposed to just have a conversation. What's with the elbow from the top and the suplexes? This is not how conversation should take place. And it is completely the furthest thing from, I would say, like you said, a conversation, a fruitful debate or conversation that would, both parties would walk away with something new, some idea, some perspective, something that they didn't know about before. And ultimately, that's all I care about, is if I can walk away from I don't care if the person crushes me and everybody else goes, you were humiliated. As long as I have expressed myself honestly, and I walked away with like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I should look into that. Maybe I should Google this thing later on, just to find out a bit more about something that some little, diamond in the in the desert that's sparked up, and that's it. But people don't see it that way. People, are constantly obsessed with who crushed who after this debate and who owned who, and it's ridiculous. But out of your experience, 10 years at Speaker's Corner, what have you actually concluded from Speaker's Corner? Let's just get that in a nutshell. Is it still worth going there and still engaging?
So I think for most people, I'd say no. For me, because my biggest target audience is actually is an Islamic audience. Most of the a large part of the rise of anti-Semitism within the UK and around the world can be attributed to the Muslim community. Obviously, not everyone in the Muslim community is anti-Semitic, but unfortunately, as an example, people in the UK who self-report as being extremely right-wing are less likely to question the Holocaust than British Muslims. And so for me, one of my biggest audiences that I want to engage with and connect with and provide a counter narrative to what they've maybe heard is the Ummah, is the Muslim community. And to be honest, it's just Dawah Central there. Every Sunday, there's maybe 50 Dawah cameras, all broadcasting in every language to millions of Muslims around the world. And so for me, it's a very obvious place to go. I haven't unfortunately gone recently because it's become too violent. I was actually physically assaulted leaving a kosher restaurant not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, by some Muslim youths, I believe Bengali, wearing kafirs over their face. I actually originally thought it was a random attack. Now suspect they were actually at the judo photographic evidence I've seen. Suspect they were at the anti-Israel protest that was organized by, I don't know if it was organized, but certainly appeared to be led by Ali Dawa and Mohammed Hijab. And so just because of the intensity of the violence, the death threats I'm receiving, and advice I've been given by people within the security services, I'm not going to Speaker's Corner for a while, which is a shame because I've been going there for years. I have been attacked there numerous times, but I think in the current climate, it would be highly unwise for me to go there. However, I repeatedly and continuously invite Ali Dawa and Mohammed Hijab to go one-on-one instead of 1-on-100 online. Just the two of us. We can talk Israel and Palestine till we're blue in the face. Right? But that we can maybe save that for later. But yeah, Speaker's Corner feels a little bit dangerous for Jews at the moment.
This is actually rather indicative of a lot of other people's experience, my own experience as well. I've been attacked myself at Speaker's Corner by a couple of people that were on your panel not long ago. One of them referred to Jews as diseases. But yeah. Oh, sorry, I'm getting a little loop back. Are you?
Let me mute myself while you're talking.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, so yeah, I think nearly everyone who is not a Muslim has experienced some form of physical altercation at Speaker's Corner, and I mean Hatun is a famous case, and she's already got like Osman warnings and stuff like that. And it seems to be a one-directional, at least it appears to me, it seems to be only from one direction. It's not like we see Muslims being attacked by other denominations or other non-beliefs or whatever, and in the same frequency as the from the Muslims to the non-believers or the non-Muslims. So I mean, I don't want to say. I will be presuming too much if I were to say that maybe there's something in the religion that might be motivating them. But that is what I would be going to if I was. But I don't want to get dragged into that side. I actually want to, since you talked about anti-Semitism and hostilities towards Jewish people, I would like to actually walk backwards from that and get into the Jewish-Palestinian conversation. Now, I saw your video about the recent flare-up that occurred was mostly motivated about the eviction, or at least stemmed from the potential eviction of some Palestinians from some houses. Is that a fair assessment? That's not.
It isn't. It isn't. So yeah, most people are attributing the Sheikh Jarrah evictions. Sheikh Jarrah, for those that don't know, is a small neighborhood in Jerusalem, which Jews called, or certainly part of it, Jews called Shimon HaTzadik and Nachalot Shimon. They're ancient Jewish communities. They have ancient Jewish graves there. And there's been a 50-year legal dispute over a small number of houses. In total, 28 houses. In this instance, we're talking 4 houses. And this has been going through the courts for 50 years as to who is the legal owner of these particular houses. There's a very sizable Arab population in East Jerusalem, or Jerusalem, let's just say. I don't like the East-West division. And there's no ethnic cleansing of this community. This community's lived there. Many in this community have lived there for hundreds of years, and they're not going anywhere. But Sheikh Jarrah, or these evictions, were capitalized on by Hamas, who orchestrated protests on Har Habayit, on the Temple Mount, the Haram al-Sharif, the Masjid al-Aqsa complex. Yeah. But so yeah, many people are attributing Sheikh Jarrah, but it was kind of the perfect storm. You had the end of Ramadan, you had Nakba Day, you had the Jewish festival of Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day, and coupled with Sheikh Jarrah, coupled with Iranian ambitions within the area in retribution, revenge for certain Israeli activity around Iranian nuclear facilities. And all of this came together and kind of was then exploded into a violence, essentially. But
so it was a
all along by Hamas. To come back to the Sheikh Jarrah eviction, so very, very quickly, brief history. So Sheikh Jarrah is a relatively new neighborhood in Jerusalem. There was a mosque there that goes back a long time. But the overwhelming majority of the land which is populated today was barren. It housed the ancient tomb of one of the last high priests of Israel, a man called Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon the Righteous. And Jews have been going there for centuries as a place of pilgrimage. In 1875, the Jewish community purchased the tomb and the surrounding land, and they established two neighborhoods, Shimon HaTzadik and Nachalat Shimon. With the 1948 war, the Jews were ethnically cleansed from that area and the old city of Jerusalem by the Jordanians. And so when the Jordanians took the land, the Jews were driven out. And on this land, the actual houses we're speaking of that are under question, where the dispute is happening, those houses didn't exist until the 50s. They were built on Jewish land in the 50s. And when Jerusalem was reunified in 67, there was a question of who is the legal owner of the land. The Arab families that were living there actually came, so in one instance, probably the most famous family, the Al-Kurds. Obviously, with a name like Al-Kurd, they're not indigenous to Israel. They're probably from over the Iraq, Syria sort of region. Kurdistan, Kurds. Most Palestinians have names which identify where they originally came from. Al-Masri, the Egyptian. Al-Maghrebi, the Northern African, from the Maghreb, Morocco, Algeria sort of region, Tunisia. Al-Saud, from Saudi Arabia, or from Arabia. And so Bosnia, the names give away where they're from. And so with the Kurd family, the Al-Kurd family, the father came from Jerusalem and the mother came from Haifa, and they were refugees from the 48 conflict. In the 50s, they were rehoused by Jordan and the United Nations Relief Work Agency on Jewish land. And so for the last 50 years, these families have been battling with the legal owners of that land, the Jewish owners of that land, who are now trying to claim the land because they're no longer ethnically cleansed and they can return. And that has basically been capitalized on this tiny, literally legal dispute. And just to show the kind of lengths that have gone, the Israel state actually said that the judges ruled in the 80s that because the families had been living there for more than 10 years, they can't be evicted just provided they pay rent, because they're protected tenants, kind of like squatters' rights in the UK. If someone's been squatting in a property for 10 years, they have certain rights, and I think they can even claim the land. I'm not an expert in law, but I know there's certain squatters' rights, and it's the same in Israel. They're considered protected tenants, but because they refuse to pay the rent, then the owners decided, well, we're going to evict, and that situation was then capitalized on by Hamas, who organized riots on the Temple Mount. And we know it's Hamas that's doing it because the Hamas flags are everywhere. They evicted the Mufti, who was amongst the Palestinians. You basically have two key players, Fatah, and who are led by Mahmoud Abbas, then Hamas. Yeah. And the Mufti of the Masjid al-Aqsa was associated with Fatah, so Hamas booted him out and drove him out of the Temple Mount. They instigated riots. They nearly burned down Masjid al-Aqsa in the process.
I did see that, yeah.
And they were chucking rocks and Molotov cocktails at Jewish police, at worshippers down below at the Western Wall. And so the Israeli police obviously responded. They can't have rioting on the Temple Mount, which endangers Jewish lives or Arab lives or anyone's lives. And then Hamas issued their decree: if the Israelis don't leave the Temple Mount area by 6 p.m., I think it was, we're going to start firing rockets on Israeli cities, which they did. They fired 5,000 rockets at Israel. And so Israel responded. And that, I was going to say in a nutshell, that wasn't a nutshell. That was quite
that's a fairly
quite a lengthy
substantial
diatribe,
nutshell.
but that's essentially what happened.
The thing is, Oh yeah, no, go on. Finish.
No, I was just going to say, from an Israeli or from a Zionist
Yes.
perspective.
Yeah. Well, you see, you made it extremely difficult for my next sort of question, because I'm going to make my position clear. I am essentially pro-Palestinian in the sense that I do agree that these people exist and they do deserve to live. Basically, that's all I'm going to say for now. Whether they the rights for the land, this and that, I have different views on that, but they exist. I do acknowledge their existence. Whether they ever were a country or not is irrelevant. We have to acknowledge that these human beings are here. They call themselves Palestinians, whether they were Jordanians or Egyptians at one time. This is where they are now. We have to do something with them. So in that sense, I am pro-Palestinian, and I do empathize with their struggle. But of course, I absolutely acknowledge the existence of Israel and its right to exist, and for the Jewish people to have a place. So these two things may appear to be somewhat, I don't know, contradicting or a paradox, but I actually believe in both of those things.
So I don't think that, to be honest, Banksy,
Exactly.
I think most Jews, certainly, and a large proportion of Israelis, certainly most Zionists, share your sentiment. I mean, I think almost every Zionist believes that Palestinians are humans and deserve a decent life. When people say pro-Palestinian, what they usually mean is they're pro the creation or the existence of a Palestinian state. And when people say they're pro-Zionist, whether they're Zionist or they're pro-Israel, it means they support the existence of the state of Israel. And I think they're not mutually exclusive. You can support both of those things.
Exactly. But my main thing was, which, as I say, your explanation of this rented area, which I'm sorry I forgot the name, but the Al something, the Arabs call it something. My main contention there was that you're telling me that a Jewish court, an Israeli court, ruled that the Jews have the legal status in that place, and that the Jewish people have the right to return, even though it was lost to them and they lost it in a war or whatever decades and decades ago. It just seems like, were there any Arabs or Palestinians on that judicial process and to actually be involved in making those decisions?
So that's a great question. I'll actually look up because I'm actually genuinely interested. I can't say about this particular court case. What I will say is that Arabs are very well represented in the Israeli judicial system. In fact, two of the highest judges in the land, one of them, Salim Gibran, I've forgotten the other one's name, have sent Jewish prime ministers and Jewish presidents to jail. So yeah, this isn't a Jewish Muslim thing. This is literally a legal dispute over land that could happen in any country. I think the complexity with this particular case is that it's dealing with ethnic cleansing, refugees, the housing of Palestinian refugees who fled in 1948, who don't have legal deeds to the property, who admitted in court they aren't the legal owners because they don't have those deeds. They admitted that, I think, in 1982. It's more complex than, say, a legal dispute that would happen in the UK between a squatter and the owner of the property, but it is still just a legal dispute. There's no racial or religious element involved in this. It could be anyone. And indeed, there are Arabs who are living in Israel who've been awarded property that they lost in the 1948 conflict. The 1948 conflict saw displacement of Jews and Arabs en masse from the entire Middle East region. And that's the other thing that nobody talks about. Nobody talks about the billions, like hundreds of billions of dollars of property that was left behind by the Jewish refugees from Muslim lands when they were ethnically cleansed from Muslim states. They had land, I always get this wrong, it's either 5 or 6 times the size of the state of Israel was left behind by Jews who were forced to flee. No one talks about this, and they've got no claim to this land. A Jew who's living in Israel because he was forced out of Lebanon or Algeria can't go back to Algiers and claim his property, however big or small that may be. So at least within the Israeli state, Jews and Arabs have the potential to try and reclaim property. It does get more complex for Arabs who actually left either Jerusalem or what the pre-67 Israel borders. It does get more complex then, and hopefully there will be some long-term solution for those that fled in 48. But it is, at essence, not a religious or racial thing. This is a legal dispute over property.
I totally understand, and I want to, I've got no problems with sort of hoping, or at least agreeing with the fact that these courts would simply be fair and even-handed. But we all know in reality, look at the George Floyd case. Are you honestly going to tell me that the external forces did not have any kind of bearing on the officer who was, found guilty of George Floyd's killing? Of course it was. Look at O.J. Simpson. The jurors in O.J. Simpson were very much biased towards in favor of O.J. Simpson. So I'm only putting this sort of, if you like, this little like splinter in the hole, that I don't think every courts are totally beyond reproach. I don't think that people are without biases. Judges are without biases, and the reason when I was thinking about this, because I listened to your video about the dispute and how it all came about, and I just thought to myself, if there were more Arab or Muslim jurors or judicial people involved in the decision making of the rights of the owners of these lands, maybe the Arabs would have less excuse, effectively, to sort of call this rulings to be farcical or false. I mean, between us, every time something happens, Muslims to this very day still say there were no Muslims on the planes in 9/11, that it was some holographic thing and it was thermite that brought the buildings down. So conspiracy theories go wide and deep in the Muslim world. You and I are not in any illusion of that. So when it comes to a court deciding what is land rights for Jewish people and Arab people without any Arab involvement in that process, the conspiracy theories are going to run wild, if not outright denial of the decision. So that's what I was thinking when I thought about this process.
So I think it's an interesting question. I can add some more context, which doesn't directly address your point, but it indirectly ties into it. And that is that the Prime Minister can't interfere with the legal process. The judicial system is separate from the government in Israel, and actually it's a tremendous force for good when it comes for advocating for rights of Arabs, of Palestinians, and holding the government to account. It's
as good as it can get.
in Israel, what's really interesting is, well, I'd say the population tends to be more right-wing, largely because the majority of Israelis are actually Jews who come from Muslim lands, and for whatever reasons, they're more likely to vote along right-wing lines than left-wing lines. So while the population is overwhelmingly to the right, not overwhelmingly, but majority to the right, actually I almost say overwhelmingly these days, to the right, the generals in the military and the judges are usually more to the left, which is really interesting. You don't imagine the generals are going to be left-wing, you imagine they're going to be right-wing, and that's not the case. Where certainly within Israel, I don't know any other country.
So the military leans center-left, if anything.
Yeah, the leadership, not the actual
soldiers or the
ranks of the IDF, but the leadership, the generals themselves at the higher echelons, they tend to be more likely to be on the left. And what we saw with the Sheikh Jarrah court case was that the government actually got involved, and Benjamin Netanyahu, then the prime minister, I don't think he will be the prime minister going forward, but who knows with Israeli politics. He actually interfered and said that we're not going to have the judgment when the court wants the judgment, because Hamas are firing rockets on us. If the family is evicted, who knows what that's going to lead to? And so the only pressure that I'm aware of, and that's not societal pressure, that's government pressure, is actually to try and defuse the situation rather than evict the families. And the other thing I really want to touch on is just the absurdity of this. We're literally talking 4 families, and 4 families are the cause of probably the biggest news story this year. To put that into context, in Burkina Faso, people are getting massacred by Islamist terrorists. The news doesn't say anything. In Yemen, this literally today, I was just reading a story. Over a dozen people killed by Houthi militants. Like, the world is on fire.
When we look at the Uyghurs in China.
Exactly, the way that nobody bats an eyelid, and yet you have 200,000 people. So they claim, probably more like 100,000, but still an awful lot of people. 100,000 people on the streets protesting Israel in the UK. Like, for what? Like, I'm not saying for what. Like, it's a tragedy. Any conflict is a tragedy, but the overwhelming majority of those that were killed were Hamas operatives or Islamic Jihad, or Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Yet the world just goes crazy. And then when you come back to what we were saying at the beginning, why is this? Well, because 4 families haven't paid rent in over 50 years, and therefore this is now going to become the most dominant news story of 2021. And for any Jew looking at it, it's very, very obvious why. All the other conflicts we mentioned have no Jews involved. Well, the reason why this one is front and center is because it involves Jews. There's only one country in the world which is a Jewish country, and it dominates headlines. Literally, I was reading an article today from France 24. This is on a day where other newspapers are reporting that Houthi rebels have killed dozens in Yemen. What was France 24 story that I was reading?
Israel.
That a goldfish in Gaza was killed in an airstrike. A goldfish. A goldfish is worth more than a poor Yemen. Like, it's insane.
Goldfish was killed. That is, wow. That's unbelievable. I mean, this is unfortunately, it does seem that priorities are not quite right around here. I mean, let's say if the priorities were actually in line, we would have protests and people burning the Chinese embassy down practically if they really wanted to care about Muslims. But this is something I found very interesting, is that it seems the majority of the Muslims, at least in Britain or in Europe, they don't seem to care so much about the so-called Muslims, but they care about Arabs. There seems to be an Arab element in this, because the kind of reaction, the visceral reaction that I saw towards the Palestinian and Israeli conflict, recent one, versus what has been happening systematically to the Uyghurs in China, is a night and day situation. They're still raising money for the Palestinians. I saw Jordan M, and I think you know Jordan M from Speaker's Corner. He went a couple of days ago to what was supposed to be some kind of Uyghur Chinese sort of embassy protest. He was the only one that showed up. He was the only one. There was no one there. People just like, we don't really care. I mean, and it just shows that they don't really care. This so-called, the Ummah is one body, and that if one part of it is hurt, all of the body is hurt. No, it's not. No, it's not. If it was, you would be in severe agony every day because of what's going on in Yemen, because of what's going on in China. But you're not.
And I go further. They don't care about Arabs either. They don't care about Palestinians. If they cared about Palestinians, it's a very, very simple test. You look at how Palestinians are living in other countries. So as an example, the Palestinians in Lebanon are housed behind an apartheid wall. They're not allowed citizenship of Lebanon, even though they've lived there for generations now. They're not allowed to access the same healthcare or education as Lebanese. They're refused access to employment. They're not allowed to travel. They're despised by the government. Like, the government is usually threatened by the Palestinian presence in Lebanon. I think it's like, someone can look this up on the internet. I mean, I can't remember the exact population, but now I think they count as something like 25% of the population in Lebanon. And they're literally living behind an apartheid wall and living in apartheid conditions. Meanwhile, the Palestinians who live in the pre-67 borders of Israel, who have Israeli citizenship, they're sitting on the Supreme Court, sending Jewish prime ministers and presidents to jail. Palestinian Christians, or Israeli, let's call them Israeli Arab Christians, are the highest performing religious group in education in Israel. And so if they actually cared about Palestinians, they'd be protesting for the treatment of the Palestinians who live in Lebanon. They'd be protesting that Assad killed more Palestinians in 1 year than Israel has killed in decades. And that's with like major wars between Israel and the Palestinians. Literally killed 4,000 Jews like that in the blink of an eye. And 4,000 Palestinians in the blink of an eye in Yarmouk. He ethnically, over 100,000 Palestinians were forced to flee and became refugees from Yarmouk in Syria. Nobody says anything. There were no protests. I went to the only vigil they had for what happened in Yarmouk, and there was like 20 people there in the UK. The UK, the Ummah, people don't care about Palestinians. They care about Jews. And it's not that they care about us, that they're bothered. They're really, really bothered that Jews are now sovereign over land that they believe belongs to Islam. They believe it's Islamic land. And that's the real tragedy. That's the real thing. It's not about Palestinians. It's not about Arabs. It's about Jews being on this land.
Now, the thing is, although you came to a very great segue in there where you were saying that Palestinians or Arabs who live in Israel and have Israeli citizenship, and I want to get back to that, but just to simply point out what you said in regards to Jewish Arabs who think that Israel is Arab land and how they're reacting towards that versus they also should, at least by all reason, believe that Spain is also Arab land or Muslim land, because Spain was dominated by the Muslims for 700 years. And yet they don't seem to have the same visceral reaction to the Christians dominating Spain and not, considering it in any shape or form Arab land. But maybe it's to do with the more recent creation of Israel. Maybe it's the timing. I don't know. But it does
I think there's two things. So one is very obvious. When you speak to any Muslim and you're a Zionist, they will tell you that Jews aren't supposed to have a country. And effectively what they're saying is you are supposed to be one of the Dhimma. You're supposed to be a Dhimmi. We'll protect you, but you're not supposed to be sovereign. You're not supposed to be equal to us. And that's a common thing I encounter all the time, is Jews aren't supposed to have a country. Watch any video from Speaker's Corner and that trope will be tried. The bigger issue is that while Al-Andalus was a golden age for Islam and it had great significance to the Ummah, it's not. So you have within Israel, you have what we would call Yerushalayim or Jerusalem, what Muslims would call Al-Quds. And actually, Quds actually comes from the word Bayt. So it was the Qudsi, which originally came from Bayt al-Maqdis. And Bayt al-Maqdis is from the Hebrew word Beit HaMikdash, which is the word for the Jewish temple, the holy temple, the holy house, Beit HaMikdash. And so you had Islam, and most Muslims today believe that it's the third holiest site in Islam. And so I think if this conflict were happening anywhere else, maybe there wouldn't be the sort of intense spotlight from the Muslim world as there is on Israel. And so, I think there's two factors. One is a belief that Jews aren't supposed to have their own country. And even if you ignore that theme that keeps on popping up, the bigger issue is Jerusalem, Al-Quds, Masjid al-Aqsa.
Yeah, I think if I don't know, Israel was established, I don't know, in Texas, which I think there was actually I heard prior to Jews going to, Balfour Declaration, going to where they are in Israel now, there might have been a conversation where they may have established Israel in America, but clearly that didn't happen. But
so it wasn't America. It's called the Uganda Plan. It was actually in Kenya. And Theodore Herzl was offered the potential to establish his Jewish state in
Kenya.
He went to the World Zionist Congress and he proposed the idea. He actually supported it. So Theodore Herzl is seen as the founder of political Zionism, we'll call it, at the end of the 19th century. And he was able to persuade the British to entertain the idea. I think it was the British, not the Ottomans. Yeah, the British to entertain the idea. And he took that to the council and they said, absolutely no way. The Jews said, we have no connection to Uganda. We are indigenous to Israel. The Jewish people became a nation effectively in that region. We had kingdoms in that region for 1,500 years. We call ourselves B'nai Israel, the children of Israel. This is who we are, and it doesn't make, we have no connection to Kenya. We haven't lived continuously in Kenya for thousands of years. We have lived in Israel continuously for thousands of years. So there's no, so yeah, you're right. There was an alternative proposed, but it just doesn't make any sense because
work.
Jews are indigenous. I mean, even the word, we call the West Bank Judea and Samaria. Judea, Jews.
Right. It's in the name. But okay, I want to get to, because we're running short on time, I want to get to the point that you mentioned about Israeli Arabs and Israeli Palestinians living in Israel as equal citizens. Now, my concept has for a while now, because I know a lot of people beat their chest. Oh, we will defeat the Jews and we will drive them into the sea and blah blah blah, and establish a Palestinian state. I don't believe such a thing can happen. I think there is nothing left of what would be considered a Palestinian state. There's too many settlements. It has been just decimated on the West Bank side. There's nothing left. Gaza is literally just a pile of rubble. At very best, it could be a city-state by itself, but nothing else. So as far as a real country for Palestinians, I honestly don't think this thing is viable. What I do think can happen is Palestinians and Israelis could live under one nation, maybe two people under one nation, but is that a viable possibility? And if that is the case, just like you said, there are Palestinian Israelis with Israeli citizenship, can this happen? And will the Jewish populace actually want this to happen? Because you have to also address the demographic issue. Now, I know I'm coupling a lot together because we're very short on time, and I want to bring it all in, finalize it. If you were to envision a scenario where Palestinians and Israelis all live in one country called Israel, and they are all equal citizens, can the Israelis afford to have such a scenario in which their demographics could potentially shift quite badly in a few decades?
So a few things. First, there already is a Palestinian state, mandatory Palestine. The British were awarded the mandate in 1920 on the condition they establish a Jewish national home there. The first thing they did was give 75% of the land to a family from Arabia called the Hashemites, and they established Jordan in 75% of the land. Today, 90% of Jordanians are Palestinian. The ruling family isn't, they're from Arabia, but the people who sit in the majority of mandatory Palestine under their own state today are Palestinians.
But how is it that they still have Palestinian refugee camps there and they don't give Palestinians status?
It's because Jordan doesn't actually. Jordan integrated the Palestinians and gave them citizenship. Every other Arab state denied Palestinians the right to citizenship, so they could be eternal refugees. And it's bizarre. It's almost like a religion. If you read the United Nations, the United Nations Relief Work Agency, which in itself is absurd, it's a refugee agency exclusively for Palestinians. Every other refugees go through the UNHCR. So in that sense, it's bizarre. They have their own agency. They have a definition of a Palestinian refugee is anyone who was living there for at least 2 years between 1946 and 1948, and then left, provided it was their father. So we have a patrilineal Palestinian refugee religion, which is inherited down the paternal line. So if you have a great-great-great-grandfather who was born in Iraq, lived in Iraq his entire life, and then came for economic reasons to mandatory Palestine in 1945, lived there for 3 years, and then left when the war broke out, you are considered a Palestinian refugee by the United Nations Relief Work Agency. And now every other one of your great-great-great-grandparents, all like 35 of them,
it's all passed down,
could be from America, Scotland, Lebanon, all around the world, and you're still a Palestinian refugee. It's absolutely absurd.
And it's inherited. The refugee status is inherited from father to son.
Yeah, and the reason you still have refugee camps, and they're not camps, they're suburbs. Yarmouk, you know that you will have almost certainly seen, it was the most powerful picture from the Syrian civil war, where there were just tens of thousands of refugees walking through a street, and the street was coming down like just rubble either side of them. That was a Palestinian refugee camp. Refugee camps have electricity, buildings, they've been there for decades. They're not tents like we imagine a refugee camp to be. They're neighborhoods of cities almost always. And the people in there are trapped in the refugee trap, where they are just inherit this status through their father. And it
almost sounds
like a pantomime. It's absurd. They're not. If they're refugees, I'm a refugee.
But
my family fled massacres in Europe, but I'm not. I'm a British citizen. Even though patrilineally I came back a refugee.
It just sounds almost like slavery, when people were slaves, were born into slavery, and they were passed down because their father was a slave, and so they became a slave, and they just seem to like just pass it down. It's unbelievable. I never thought you could be a refugee hereditary, like through parental hereditary.
It's treated like a religion where it doesn't go through the mother. It's the weirdest thing. So if your mother came from there, that's fine. You're not a refugee. But if your great-great-grandfather did, and it's through the line of the fathers, then you're a refugee. Mazel tov. It's weird.
Yeah. That to me was.
So then the other thing. So coming on to us a bit of a tangent, but it was an important tangent to make. So there already is a de facto Palestinian state. So then what happens with the rest of the land? And so effectively you're advocating for a binational state. I don't think that will work. I'd support it if it would work. The reason I don't think it would work is every single state around Israel is in flames because of civil wars, whether it's Lebanon, Syria, Egypt. There's the huge internal divisions. I don't think Jews and Arabs are suddenly going to become bosom buddies if they create a new state which is called Israel time. It's just not going to happen. There's too much bad blood. However, if it did happen, I would happily support that. I think you're right.
But you said that that Palestinians have become Israeli citizens. So such a phenomenon has happened.
It's not that. It's any Arab who didn't fight Israel in the 48 war, so it was neutral, or even some of them even fought with the nascent state of Israel. Any of those Arabs were granted citizenship. They have complete equality. In 1948, when the state was declared independence, 20% of the population were Arabs. To this day, 20% of the population, more or less, are Arabs. And so you've had consistently a large minority Arab population who have complete equality. Some of them identify as Palestinian. Some of them, the majority don't. The majority identify as Israeli Arabs, and when polled, wouldn't want to live in a Palestinian state because they recognize they have more freedoms in Israel, particularly when you move to like the Christian communities, as an example.
But the wider Palestinian authorities, like the Gazans or the PLOs, how about them? Would you ever envision a scenario in which they would integrate and become like those other Israelis?
Truthfully, I cannot envisage a solution where Israel would share power with Abbas or with Hamas because they're sworn to destroy them. I don't think most Jews want to live under, as I mentioned before, most Jews in Israel come from Muslim lands and they were forced out of those Muslim lands. They don't want to then live in another Muslim country because they would rather entrust their safety and security with fellow Jews just because of the history of their existence in Muslim lands. Now, that's not to say that they're hostile to Muslims, they're far from it. But I think most Jews, given what happened to us in Europe, what happened to us in the Islamic world, we no longer want to depend on others to protect us. So we don't want to pay the jizya for protection. We'd rather protect ourselves.
Yeah, but I'm not saying that it would become a Palestinian or an Arab or a Muslim state. It would become a state which could still have the dominant Israeli, European, sort of Western democracy and Western sort of pillars to keep it as a democracy, but integrate the Palestinian Arabs into that society, so they blend into the society rather than.
I mean, you already have that in Israel. The coalition that's being put forward to oust Netanyahu has a Muslim Brotherhood, like as Islamist as you can get, party who are going to be in government. It's made up of the first national. We're going to have our first national religious prime minister in the form of Bennett. He's going to share that role with Lapid, who's a centrist, centre-left. And then you've got a Muslim Brotherhood party in the coalition. You've got a strong socialist party in the coalition. And so you already have that in Israel. What we're talking about is actually if Israel were then to take in the territory, which say, for instance, places like Gaza and Hebron are overwhelmingly Hamas. Hamas and the PLO haven't had elections in 15 years. Yes. Abbas is sitting his 15th or 16th year, I think, of a 4-year term. This is why I just, when people talk about, okay, let's say you made this democracy which was shared between Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs, where you have probably equal populations, as many Arabs as you have Jews, and you'd have this perfect utopian democracy. I'd be like, well, show me which Arab state near Israel, or any Arab state, which has a decent democracy. They just don't have it. Look at the Palestinians. They haven't had elections in 15 years. Why would they suddenly become super democratic if they were sharing the government with Jews? What I imagine would happen was just that it would be a battle for power, and one group would overpower the other group, and who knows which way it would go. But I don't think the two nations will, unfortunately, I don't think they'll coexist, which is why I think it's more likely that either you could have like an emirate type solution where you've got almost emirate states. The Palestinian people are very divided. Someone from Nablus won't marry someone from Hebron. Even though they're quite close to each other, the Palestinians are a very divided people. So you could have almost like a city-state solution, like you mentioned before with Gaza being one of those. You could have a federation. You could have a two-state solution, and a two-state solution could still work. As recently as 2008, Ehud Olmert, who was then the then prime minister, offered the Palestinians basically all of the West Bank, all of Gaza, where they were lacking some areas like the Gush Etzion, which is a settlement block near Jerusalem. They were then traded land, which are large Arab towns and cities just on the border of the West Bank. So there would have been a few swaps. They were offered East Jerusalem as their capital, the old city of Jerusalem to be shared between both people, with all the holy places open to all. The Palestinians turned it down. Like every time the Palestinians have been offered peace and offered what they say they want, they've turned it down and walked away from the negotiation. Why? You only need to listen to Hamas. They believe they're fighting a war of return. Where are they returning to if they're in Gaza? They believe they're returning to Jerusalem, they're returning to Haifa, they're returning to Tel Aviv, to Jaffa. That's what they're talking. And that's why, just for me, the only real chances are to some sort of state. But I just think this binational state is less likely to work, in my opinion. Obviously, who am I? I'm some bloke living in London.
That's still an opinion. I mean, that's the whole point of these shows, is we have our opinions and we express them. But the thing is, you said you discussed this whole thing about a two-state solution, but you also said that we can't have 500,000 Israeli or Jewish refugees, because if the Palestinians suddenly take the whole of the West Bank and go back to the 47 type of borders, then you're going to have these massive population of Jews who've settled in these settlements, about 500,000, which Israel either has to absorb or something's going to have to be done with them. And so by the mere fact that these 500,000 people now exist, it has almost solidified Jewish presence in the West Bank. And how are we going to deal with that?
This is the absurdity, the perversion of the argument, where we can't entertain the idea of a Palestinian state that has Jews in it. 20% of Israelis are Arabs. Not one Palestinian is Jewish. And we can't envisage a Palestinian state that has Jews in it. And the only solutions that are proposed is, well, the settlements need to be dismantled and the Jews need to leave. But they were born there.
No.
And many of them lived in that land longer than the Palestinians.
No, the reason I say that is, it's not that I can't envision it. I can, as I said, I just proposed a scenario in which I would like to wave a magic wand and have Israelis and Palestinians live in one nation. But so I can absolutely envision such a scenario. It's just I don't see the practicality of it due to the animosity that has built up for such a long time, that I would say that the minute Palestinians see the West Bank as a Palestinian state, quote unquote, with a defined border and everything, they're just going to go on the eviction rampage. They're going to pogrom those 500,000 Jews. You and I know the pogroms that the Middle Easterners have bestowed upon the Jews. We know about Iraq. Actually, I don't know if there was a massive pogrom in Iran, but there certainly has been a reduction in Jewish population and certainly, discrimination towards the Jews in Iran. Even in Iran, which they've been there since the time of Cyrus. And I mean, I don't even see an Iranian Jew as anything other than an Iranian. I don't even distinguish them because they're Iranian through and through. But there is still persecution of Jews and Christians in Iran. So there's that. There's the pogroms in Iraq, pogroms in Morocco, in Tunisia. There's been pogroms of Jews everywhere. And to think that a newly established Palestinian state will not go on a pogrom of the Jews in that area, I think is unrealistic. I mean, again, I would love to wave a magic wand and have them all live happily ever after, but I am a realist about it. Now, the proposal that I made was the ideal situation, not the reality, because I can tell you hands down, what I said, if I said it to a group of Palestinians, if I went to one of those Palestinian protests and said, hey, how about if we just have one state where the Palestinians and the Israelis will live together, I would be hung, drawn and quartered within minutes by even mentioning such a scenario. So absolutely, I know that when it comes to the sort of anger that lies within the Palestinians and within the wider Arab world, such a scenario is almost impossible. But you see, let me just say, for me, when these protests are now over, Israel and Hamas have supposedly made some degree of peace together. We and all those people who were in the streets screaming free Palestine and throwing sticks at the Israeli embassy and screaming and shouting and beating their chests, now they're at home in their warm beds with their bellies full, whilst a Palestinian is having to pick up his life from a rubble that was his building. They're the ones who have to live with the consequences of the Europeans and the North American Muslims screaming war, war, war. This is why I despise those people, because they don't live with the consequences of their warring and warmongering sort of attitude. The Palestinians are the ones who live with that.
So I touch a couple of things, but before I do any of that, one of my favourite clips from the protests was Hizb ut-Tahrir, who are political Islamists. They're like the Muslim Brotherhood, for those that aren't familiar with them.
Nawaz was part of them.
Yeah, exactly. And they had a rally in Birmingham. And there's a bloke on the megaphone saying, Muslim armies of the world, it's time for you to do something. It's time for jihad. It's time for action. Us Muslims in the UK, we'll make dua for you. You need to go and fight. How brave of you. You're going to pray while you're sending your brothers off to war. How very brave of you from Birmingham.
Pray away.
The other thing I'd add is, with Iran, there absolutely were pogroms. 97% of Iranian Jews today live in Israel for a reason.
Especially in the 1940s and 50s, my mum remembers a lot of their Jewish neighbors started to move out.
Yeah, one of my best friends was born in Iran, a really good friend of mine. Maybe he's watching this. He was born in Iran, Jewish, and they fled. And he tells me amazing stories. He tells me stories of how his I don't know if it was him or his family would be nursed by their Muslim neighbors. Like, there was really good relations between Jews and Muslims in Iran. Similarly, this is the thing with history, and even today, when I go and speak to Palestinians, most of the ordinary Palestinians I speak to, I'm not talking about Hamas or Islamic Jihad or the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. I'm talking about ordinary Palestinians. When I speak to them, they just want peace. When I speak to the settlers, it's just a family. We say settler, it's just a family who's living in a piece of land which people think Jews shouldn't live. When you speak to them, they just want peace. Most people want peace, and most people probably can coexist. Unfortunately, the nationalist and the political tensions within that region make that virtually impossible. And so I don't think many Jewish well, we'll just call them for settlers, for want of a better word, but Jews who are living over the Green Line, the 500,000 of them, I don't think the majority of them would want to remain in a Muslim state or Palestinian state because they wouldn't feel safe.
No, exactly.
And so while on a day-to-day basis you can have good relations, you only need to look at what happened in Lod and the mixed cities of Israel during the conflict, where literally dozens of cars, as an example, were set on fire in Lod. Not one of those cars were Arab, they were all Jewish. Yeah. Arab neighbors were drawing stars on the houses that belonged to Jews so that they could get firebombed by Israeli Arabs.
I even heard
neighbors who had good relations.
I even heard. Oh, sorry, go on. So I even heard a lady, a Jewish lady, saying, as they were going around the streets doing these things, my next door neighbor started screaming, "This house is a Jewish house." I couldn't believe it. We've lived together for years.
Yeah. And so I think most settlers would look at that and say, actually, I wouldn't feel safe in a Palestinian state, and for that reason would leave. But I would say that many Palestinians I speak to do say, not the Palestinian Authority, they deny Jews from living in their state, but ordinary Palestinians, many say they have coexisted with Jews and they could coexist in a one-state solution. And there's definitely a sizable proportion of Palestinians who do advocate for a one-state solution. And to be honest, most of the settlers also advocate for a one-state solution. So there's people on both sides of the divide that are advocating for it. Interestingly, it's the leftists in Tel Aviv who are most for a two-state solution because they believe Jews and Arabs can't live together, whereas the so-called racist settlers, the ones that are saying, actually, we can and we do.
This is my. That's what I mean. Anyway, this has gone way longer than I hope. I hoped it'd go longer. It's just that I know you're busy and you've got baby and everything, and that's why I wanted to always keep things to like an hour sort of region. There was one. There's so many questions that I have. Okay, the one thing which was which a lot of people talk about, and I want you to address this because I have my own ideas about it, but I think this myth or this concept should at least be addressed. It's two parts. One is the concept, the slander of, I guess you could say the slander or the incorrect accusation of Israel being in an apartheid state. So I want you to, it's going to be an apartheid theme. The other aspect is, why was Israel one of the last nations in the world to recognize the apartheid state of South Africa and still continued dealing with them even after that? Those are like, if you like, combined themes of apartheid. Israel being accused of being an apartheid state, even though technically it's not. And I explained that by saying Britain can't be an apartheid state to France. They can discriminate against the French. They don't have to not discriminate against the French. It's not their country. And it's the same with Israel. That's how I see it. And also the apartheid situation of South Africa, which Israel was very much in support of for a very long time, or at least till the very last countries, I think it was United States and Israel, one of the two last countries who actually started to separate themselves from dealing with South Africa. Go ahead.
So the first question, I'm very qualified to answer. The second one, I'll give you my opinion, but I'm not the most qualified to answer it. So with the question of whether Israel is an apartheid state, is glaringly obvious it isn't an apartheid state. What people conflate is that the West Bank is under the Palestinian Authority and Israel is under the Israeli government. And so the Palestinians vote in Palestinian elections, they pay taxes to the Palestinian Authority, or the taxes go to the Palestinian Authority, and they're paid on Palestinian healthcare, education, whatever, any services that the government provides, that's provided for by the Palestinian Authority. Israelis vote, whether they're Arabs, Jewish, whatever, Druze, Christian, Muslim, they vote in Israeli elections and their taxes go to Israel. And so there is no discrimination. It's actually against the law to discriminate in Israel based on anyone's religion or race. And so that's why you have the best performing groups in education are Christian Arabs. It's why you have Arab judges and Jewish prime ministers and presidents to jail. In South Africa, blacks and whites couldn't drink from the same fountains. They couldn't share the same services. They were completely segregated. There was actual oppression. There was actual apartheid. That's not what's happening in Israel. What people do is they conflate the fact that the West Bank Arabs in the West Bank are under a different law. But if you wanted them under the same law, that would mean that Israel would have to annex it and make them Israeli citizens, which most Palestinians don't want. They don't want to be Israeli, they want to be Palestinian. And so it's this absurdity where people are holding Israel accountable for something that nobody wants. The Palestinians don't want it and the Israelis don't want it, certainly not at the minute. And so there is no apartheid. It's an absolutely absurd charge. And there are actual apartheid conditions that the Palestinians are subject to in places like Lebanon, where they're denied citizenship and all the things we listed earlier. But this never comes up. People don't care about the gender apartheid that's happening in Iran. They don't care about the actual Palestinian apartheids in places like Lebanon. They only care about Israel. Why? Because it goes back to no Jews, no news. The reason people focus on Israel is the Jews, and that's at least in my opinion, that's what's going on. The second question was why was Israel one of the last to stop to sever ties from apartheid South Africa? I think you answered the question. Again, I'm not qualified to answer this, so I'm giving an opinion,
sure.
which isn't backed up with much research. But you named it in the as you put the question. You mentioned United States. Israel has very, very close relationships with the United States. The United States foreign policy around the world, Israel tends to mirror it. We have I'm British, but Israel and the US have a very similar foreign policy. And if the US says jump, Israel tends to say how high. And so if you want to be angry at somebody, don't be angry at Israel, be angry at America. America has far more power and influence in this tiny little Jewish state who's basically just trying to survive. So as I said, I'm not the most qualified to answer it, but I know that Britain had relations with South Africa up until very close to the end, or party South Africa, sorry. And so, yeah, if you want to be angry at states, by all means, be angry at Israel. I mean, I went on anti-apartheid marches from a young age singing Kozi Sikaleli. But if you want to be angry at somebody, definitely be angry at Israel for that. I think that's a really fair criticism of the state. But there are probably larger targets who maybe had more influence over Israel's position than this tiny little state that's fighting for survival. Well, that would be my unqualified answer.
No, that's fine, because when I was doing some research on this aspect, I found most of the commentary was around the fact that the reason Israel continued to support South Africa is because South Africa became kind of a lonely pariah state, and Israel was looking for allies wherever they could find them, and they happened to just, be allied, and Israel had very little allies. Obviously, they had the United States. Even European friendly terms is always been kind of wavering. I don't think Israel has fully trusted the Europeans to really back it when their chips are down. So they've always been looking for much more solid support for Israel, and that's at least in the commentaries that I read was that they were actually supporting other places like Angola and other places who became kind of pariah or solo states where they didn't have a lot of allies, and South Africa happened to be one of those. But I will leave it there, because there is I could talk to you for in the next day and a half, and I know you have a family and you have baby to look after and everybody else. So I would love to, at some point in the future, we'll pick up another conversation and talk again. But thank you so much for now, and thank you for coming on the show. It's been amazing. Would you like to have any sort of want to promote anything or say anything about it?
Yeah. So first, I'd like to say thank you for having me. I've wanted to talk. Similarly, I've wanted to be on the show for a while. I watch your videos I used to watch your videos from the park. They're not that many these days for the same sort of reasons as I don't go. If people do want to watch the content we produce, they can find us as the Israel Advocacy Movement on Twitter. We're at Israel Advocacy. On YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. Please give us a follow. We're desperate for subs. We need all the friends we can get.
But I follow you on Twitter as well, so it's awesome. I don't really do much in Instagram. I think that's just for me. I'm getting a bit long in the tooth for that stuff. Instagram and Snapchat and all these are like, when I hear 12-year-olds talking about them, I'm like, yeah, I think I'm definitely too old for these.
No, I'm just looking forward to the Banksy TikTok. Zoubida's on there. Zoubida's on there.
I know.
The debate and put me on there.
This is the thing. We never got to talk about Zoubida and the Waleed performance, but I would have loved to have gone in deep on that one as well. Although I did use some of the clips in order to highlight some serious anti-Semitism. that just a little. I think if someone described my entire race of people as a disease, I'd say they're prejudiced towards me.
No, but apparently he isn't.
Apparently
no, in fairness, I think with people like Waleed and Zoubida, that they definitely have anti-Semitic views, but I don't think they're aware of them, and I don't think they actually want them. I think they would like to be friends with Jews and consider themselves friends of Jews, maybe not Israel, but because of the environments they've grown up in, they just can drop a line like Jews are a disease and not even realize they're being offensive.
Just casually, just a little anti-Semitism here, a little there. But the thing is, this is the irony, and I'm sorry I'm taking time. They would never use the N-word in the same casual manner. They would never use the word that refers to Pakistanis in that, casual manner. And they actually go out of their way to scream and shout about racists who've used N-words on panel shows and stuff. They scream about them. Oh, we got to get rid of these racists. I'm like, love, pick up a mirror, have a little look. And have a little bit of introspection, because you have used the same level of slurs against a group that you don't like, but you don't seem to even notice it. It goes right over their heads. It's just like a 747 aeroplane. Just.
I mean, anti-Semitism is the acceptable form of racism in society today. It's the weirdest thing. We literally had a convoy of cars drive past my house, screaming they were going to rape my daughter, rape Jewish women, and rape their mothers, rape their daughters. Like, it's insane, the level of anti-Semitism here. If you could imagine, like, the EDL going through a Muslim neighborhood and saying that, the outrage. If you could imagine the BNP going to a black community and announcing that it would be, the outcry would be insane. Like, nobody would, the BNP wouldn't dare do that because they would know the consequences. But the fact you have people who believe they can announce on megaphone. There's an even better video I filmed at Mohammed Ajab's protest when they protested our celebration of the ceasefire. There's a video of one of, I assume, friends, because he's at his protest, they're standing next to each other all the time, marching through the street next to a police officer, saying, we're going to find some Jews, we're going to find some Zionists, we want their blood. The police officer just strolling alongside. It's like, what?
Just want their blood.
Other community you could say that. You couldn't walk down the street and say, we're going to look for some black people, we want their blood. A police officer would arrest you straight away for saying that. Yet somehow, because he's saying Jew instead of black person or any other minority group, it's fine. I think
it's
just a nice Sunday stroll.
I think they would even be in trouble if they said Chinese people or Koreans or Vietnamese. They would still get in some, hot water. But
I mean, you can't call COVID the China virus because that's racist.
That's racist.
But you can say we want Jewish blood. We're going to find some Jews. That's fine.
It is a bit hypocritical, and unfortunately, we do live in a very sort of messed up. I mean, by the way, just for the white folks out there, white racism is also a form of acceptable racism at the moment. Yeah, I'd say the most common form of acceptable racism. Yeah. So if you say you want white blood or Jewish blood, you probably get away with it. And I say that in a sarcastic form.
Yeah.
Because it's horrific. But yeah, thank you, Joseph. I'm going to let you go, sir, and I will wrap up this show. It's been a pleasure, and we will I really definitely want to do this again. So just let me know when you're free.
Definitely.
You're the one who has the more responsibility than me. I'm a single. Well, I used to be a single guy, but I'm still single. I don't have any kids, so I've got much more time than you do.
Amazing. All right, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Sir.
I really enjoyed it.
Have a good one, and give my best to the family and the kids. And I will talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was the show. That was a great conversation with Joseph. I think one of the most interesting conversations I've had in a long time as a result of Speaker's Corner sort of, if you like, people. I'll be honest, Speaker's Corner is become very boring and repetitive, and so has a lot of the hangouts or the shows that revolve around it. So I'm glad that I had that. That was wonderful. I would have liked to have put more questions, or maybe even tougher questions to Joseph, maybe in regards to United Nations resolutions, but we never really got round to that. But unfortunately, that's how it is. Maybe next time we'll pick up on some of those and see how it goes. I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you for coming. Love yourselves, love each other, kiss each other. Have a wonderful evening and enjoy the hot weather. And I will leave you with I don't know. I'm looking for a song to let this show go. What are we doing, kids? What are we gonna play? I don't know. Hold on. It's coming. Oh damn. I can't find something. I'm just gonna go with something bluesy. Oh no. Hold on. No, I'm gonna go with the bluesy thing because jazz, just some random jazz. Let's see what this is. There you go. Elevator music. Love you all. Peace. We would like that in the Middle East too.